In the 5th year of their marriage, Dylan had an affair. He secretly kept a mistress behind Elizabeth's back, but when Elizabeth found out, she didn't make a scene. Instead, the very next day, she made the mistress willingly leave with a wealthy merchant from City H. After that day, Dylan tacitly returned to the family. Still the gentle and considerate husband he had always been, Elizabeth thought it was just a minor episode. A year later, her maternal family's company declared bankruptcy. Her father jumped from a building under the weight of massive debt, her mother was humiliated to death by creditors, and her brother was hit by a car and left in a vegetative state. Unable to bear the shock, she fell seriously ill. At the moment before death, Dylan grimaced in fury. When you handed Georgia over to that old man, leading to her being tortured to death in bed, her entire body left without a patch of unbroken skin, you should have foreseen this day would come, Elizabeth. This is your retribution. So this was it. All of this was Dylan's revenge against her. Elizabeth lay on the bed, her face deathly pale, staring blankly at the man she had loved with her life, until she finally died with bitter resentment. Opening her eyes again, she found herself standing at the study door. Hello, everyone, welcome to my channel. Subscribe us to read wonderful novels every day. Now the story begins. Her breath was still ragged from the shock. The astonishment and grief in her heart not yet fully subsided. When the sound of conversation inside reached her ears, Dylan was on the phone. Thanks, bro. Just transfer that suburban villa of yours to Georgia's name for now. I owe you one. And remember, don't let your sister-in-law find out. This familiar conversation. Elizabeth suddenly jolted awake. Had she been reborn? That's right, in her previous life. It was at this exact moment she accidentally discovered Dylan was keeping another woman outside. Coming back to her senses, she heard the voice inside say, Georgia is special. Just being with her makes me feel relaxed and full of passion, unlike Elizabeth, who only makes me feel suffocated, dull and boring. I'm just taking a break in between, and when I get tired of playing around, it won't stop me from loving her again. Listening again, my heart still skipped a beat. Elizabeth clenched her fingers, recalling the words he said before death, and couldn't help but tear up. Pulling back her thoughts, she returned to sit on the sofa. Dylan paused in his steps the moment he saw her upon coming out. Darling, when did you get back? Just sat down after coming in. Elizabeth suppressed her emotions and said calmly, the person who was supposed to be out shopping had returned early. Dylan replaced the smile on his face with guilt and said, there's an issue with a project. I need to go back to the office. The same excuse as in the previous life. Elizabeth stared at him blankly for 2 seconds. Go ahead. In this life, she's tired and no longer wants to cling to it. Dylan indeed didn't return all night. As for Elizabeth, she sat listlessly until dawn. When the first ray of sunlight streamed in, she rubbed her dry eyes, then got up, finished breakfast, and left the house. First, she went to the law firm, then arrived at the Cleveland Families Corporation. Dylan's office was on the top floor. As soon as Elizabeth stepped out of the elevator, the area was deserted, but ambiguous murmurs could be heard from the office. Mr. Dylan, Georgia can't take it anymore. Mr. Dylan. Dylan, instantly displeased, gripped her waist more forcefully and thrust a few times, making the woman beneath him gasp repeatedly with pleasure. Then, with a deep voice that was both coaxing and commanding, he asked, Georgia, you're being naughty. What should you call me? The woman clutched his hand, feeling as if she had ascended to the clouds. Brother. Georgia won't dare again. Woo-woo. Good girl. Elizabeth dug her nails deep into her flesh. Though she had seen through the entire truth, her heart was still shattered beyond repair in this very moment. After what felt like an eternity, she finally raised her hand to knock on the door. Upon entering, she saw Dylan sitting at his desk, his face brimming with satisfaction as he asked, what brings you here? There's a document that needs your signature. Elizabeth pulled out the divorce papers from her bag. Then she flipped to the signature page at the end and handed it to him across the desk. What document? Dylan took it and was just about to glance at it. A muffled whimper came from under the table. He shuddered and leaned back, then coughed lightly a few times. Trying to cover up the earlier sound, Elizabeth pretended not to hear, her nails digging crescent marks into her bag as she swallowed the bitterness in her throat and replied, nothing much, just a property transfer agreement. Hearing this, Dylan didn't question further. He picked up the pen on the desk somewhat impatiently, signed his name with a flourish, and said, you could have just sent someone over with such a trivial matter. Don't tire yourself out. Was he worried about her getting tired, or afraid she might find out? Elizabeth curled her lips into a mocking smile. It's fine, just this once, I'll leave you to your work then. As soon as she stepped out of the office, she immediately took out her phone and made a call. Cleveland family's 20% stake in the group. I can sell it to you at a low price. Okay, when should we sign the contract? In a month. By then, the divorce will take effect, and she'll also let go of the company she poured her heart and soul into building up. Dylan. In our past life you resented me for sending that person away. In this life, I shall grant your wish. Before leaving, Elizabeth went to the restroom. As soon as she stepped out, she bumped into Georgia walking towards her. With a curvaceous figure and an incredibly innocent face, the type every man would adore. Mrs. Cleveland, why haven't you left yet? Georgia made no attempt to conceal it. She deliberately exposed a glimpse of her chest, displaying the love marks as both a boast and a provocation. Elizabeth stopped in her tracks, scrutinizing her. In her previous life, she had acted with ruthless efficiency, making Georgia back down within a day and striking a deal that led to her voluntarily resigning from the secretary position and leaving for City H. Now, she couldn't be bothered to engage with her. She withdrew her gaze, offering no response as she walked past the crowd toward the elevator. But before she could take more than a few steps, coffee was splashed onto her back. "Ah," Georgia exclaimed, raising her cup with a flick of her wrist. "So sorry about that. I just spent some effort cheering up Mr. Dylan, and my hands are still shaky." Hearing these words, Elizabeth felt as if she could see those entangled scenes, making her sick to her stomach. Elizabeth couldn't be bothered to get involved in their relationship anymore. But that didn't mean she could be humiliated, so she quickly stepped forward and slapped Georgia across the face. Little did she know, Dylan happened to walk out just then. Georgia quickly fell to the ground in front of her, covering her face and kneeling to beg for mercy. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cleveland, I really didn't mean to. Please don't be angry with me." The man hurried over upon seeing this. He pushed Elizabeth away, causing her already scalded back to hit the corner of the wall, making her gasp in pain. But Dylan didn't notice and instead crouched down to ask the person on the ground, "What's going on here?" Georgia pursed her lips and said fearfully, "I had a bit of low blood sugar just now, felt dizzy, and accidentally spilled coffee on Mrs. Cleveland's back. It's only fair that she got angry and slapped me, but my head is so dizzy." Hearing this, Dylan glared at Elizabeth. His eyes burned with barely contained fury as he snapped, "She's just a young intern, bound to be a little clumsy. Was it really necessary to make such a big deal out of it?" With that, he immediately scooped her up and carried her into the office. Watching that anxious retreating figure, Elizabeth felt all her grievances dissolve into two streams of tears. She remembered once when she had just a small cut on her finger, Dylan had been just as frantic, carrying her to the hospital for emergency care, leaving the on-duty doctor both amused and exasperated. Now, his concern was directed at someone else. She had clearly decided to let go, yet her heart still ached terribly. Bearing the pain, she straightened up, left the company, and went straight to the civil affairs office to file for divorce. Once the cooling-off period was over, she and Dylan would be completely finished. Back home, Dylan didn't return. He only sent a message saying he had to work overtime at the company and reminded her not to be late for tomorrow's dinner appointment. It was a client dinner they had agreed to attend earlier. Elizabeth only replied with an okay. She neither mentioned the grievances she suffered today nor exposed his lie about working overtime again, because it no longer mattered. When she arrived at the club the next day, she didn't see Dylan, but instead encountered Georgia. "Mr. Dylan is still in a meeting that hasn't ended yet. He asked me to come first to inform you and also to learn a thing or two." Georgia unusually adopted a strictly businesslike demeanor. Elizabeth had no choice but to lead her into the private room. During the dinner, Georgia actively proposed toasts, her body practically leaning onto the client. The underlying implications were obvious to anyone with eyes. Elizabeth had always despised such behavior, so she got up and went to the restroom. When she returned, the private room was crowded with people, pushing through the crowd. She entered only to find the scene in complete chaos. Dylan came over, but the client was lying in a pool of blood. "What's going on?" Elizabeth asked in confusion, but when they saw Georgia disheveled and trembling, curled up in Dylan's arms, they roughly understood. He was furious for the sake of his beloved, but who knew the next second she would also receive a slap. "Don't you know what's going on?" Dylan, his eyes bloodshot, glared at her like an enraged lion and roared, "Elizabeth, If you want to play the casting couch game, I won't stop you, but don't drag Georgia into it. She's pure-hearted, not as unscrupulous as you." Elizabeth stood frozen in place, her face burned with pain, but his words tore at her heart even more. She would stop at nothing. During the company's startup phase, frequent business trips were necessary. She once found herself in a similar dangerous situation but chose to offend the client rather than compromise, managing to escape. At that time Dylan was so angry that he went to confront them. Just like today, he beat the person up severely, got detained for a few days because of it, yet still comforted her. "You did great. Thank you for protecting my Elizabeth." From then on, everyone knew how much she despised under-the-table deals, but now, in Dylan's eyes, she had become a woman who would stop at nothing for business. Elizabeth let a tear slip from the corner of her eye. "Is this how you see me?" Dylan was taken aback. Visibly wavering, at that moment, Georgia grabbed his sleeve, her face flushed as she said, "Mr. Dylan, the madam asked me to toast, but I declined, saying I couldn't handle alcohol, yet Mr. Clay kept forcing drinks on me, and now I feel terrible." His expression turned sharp again as he finished speaking, his gaze at Elizabeth like venom. "Hearts change, and now I can't even see through you anymore." With that, he picked the person up and walked out. Elizabeth lowered her gaze, remaining silent for a long time before forcing a smile, one that looked more painful than tears. Yes, human hearts are fickle. He was no longer her Dylan anymore. On her way home, she was dragged into a dark alley. "What do you want?" Elizabeth turned pale with fear, but the other party ignored her, instead pinning her firmly to the ground, answering her question with action. There were 99 bottles of strong liquor piled on the ground. The man opened them one by one and poured them all down her throat. Elizabeth wanted to scream for help, but the next moment she was choked and couldn't make a sound. The strong liquor burned her throat, sharp and stinging. Elizabeth struggled in agony, but like a lamb on the chopping block, she couldn't move, only tears streaming endlessly. After forcing the alcohol down her throat, the man tore open her flimsy clothing, exposing her snow-white delicate body, which drew lecherous laughter and lustful gazes from them. "Wait," one of them suddenly spoke up. "The boss only told us to teach her a lesson, don't take it too far, we can't afford the consequences." But another retorted, "What's there to fear? Have you ever seen a man treat his own wife so cruelly? Even if we take her, he'd probably thank us for it." Her eyes snapped open as if struck by a bolt of lightning. Are they talking about Dylan? Just because Georgia pretended to be plied with alcohol and nearly fell victim to a casting couch, he felt heartbroken and wanted her to experience the same. He's utterly smitten with Georgia. Just as the man was about to lay his filthy hands on her skin, police sirens blared outside, followed by a passerby sister shouting at them, "Stop. I've already called the police." They were so frightened that they all scattered in different directions. Elizabeth was out of danger, but she stared blankly at the night sky, her whole being as if she had lost her soul. Suddenly, she burst into tears. All the grievances in her heart poured out, and after a while, she wretchedly collapsed to the ground, retching until there was nothing left but bile. Then, trembling, she stood up and walked home. For the next week, Dylan didn't come home. During this time, neither of them reached out. Just like their usual cold wars after arguments, neither took the initiative to break the silence, but Elizabeth knew his daily whereabouts. Georgia posted on social media every day, flaunting how Dylan took her to candlelit dinners, rented out an entire movie theater for her, and even gifted her a grand fireworks show. Each day brought a new extravagant gesture. He also gave her designer bags, jewelry, a house, and an unlimited black card. The extravagance surpassed even that of his legitimate wife. Elizabeth wasn't idle either, staying at home busily clearing out belongings. Since she had decided to leave, everything related to her shouldn't remain. On the first day, Georgia posted 9 intimate photos of the two, while she burned all 999 commemorative photos with Dylan. The next day, Georgia posted a photo of the ceramic dolls they had made together, then smashed every antique porcelain Dylan had gifted her over the years into pieces. On the 7th day, Georgia shared a video of a man pouring his heart out in a confession, and she removed the ring from her ring finger. The pigeon egg diamond still sparkled brilliantly, but their love had long withered. Elizabeth took one last look before tossing it into the toilet without hesitation and flushing it away. That very midnight, Dylan returned. The other side of the bed sank down. Dylan wrapped his arm around her waist. "Honey, let's not give each other the cold shoulder anymore, okay? Tomorrow is the company's 10th anniversary annual meeting, and we'll attend together. It was also their 5th wedding anniversary. This day held extraordinary significance, as she had personally organized it in previous years, and this would be the last time. Elizabeth shifted slightly toward the edge of the bed and responded with a soft as his hand missed its target. Dylan froze in place, thinking Elizabeth was still harboring resentment. He was relieved he had prepared a grand gift in advance, surely enough to appease her. With this thought, he peacefully fell asleep, but the next day, an unexpected incident occurred at the annual meeting. The massive screen on the cruise ship first played the company's development history, followed by Dylan and Elizabeth's decade-long love story. The two have weathered storms together, supporting each other through thick and thin. It made everyone present extremely envious. Even Dylan's gaze softened, but just at this touching moment, the screen suddenly switched content, displaying dozens of intimate photos of Georgia and Dylan, as well as her personal private photos. Instantly, an uproar ensued as everyone assumed it was Elizabeth's doing. After all, only the rightful wife would orchestrate such an exposure of the other woman. Dylan's gaze turned sharp as he let out an angry shout. "Elizabeth, what do you mean by this?" Elizabeth was about to explain when Georgia rushed up to them, tearfully interrupting. "Mrs. Cleveland, Mr. Dylan and I have not crossed any boundaries. Why would you take these photos to frame me and ruin my reputation, Mr. Dylan? To prove my innocence, I'd better resign and leave. I don't want to affect your marital relationship." With these words, she ran out of the banquet in tears. Dylan failed to stop her in time, his eyes filled with anxiety as he tried to chase after her, but Elizabeth grabbed his hand. "It wasn't me." She certainly didn't want to take the blame for this, but Dylan didn't believe her. He pushed Young Kai's hand away, causing Elizabeth to stumble back several steps and crash into the champagne tower behind her. The whole structure toppled over, knocking her to the ground. Instantly, several cuts appeared on her body. "You've now resorted to stalking, secretly photographing, and spreading rumors. Is there anything you wouldn't dare to do? I originally wanted to cheer you up, but now it's clearly unnecessary." As he spoke, he pulled out an emerald necklace. It was the Douglas family's heirloom dowry passed down for generations, but a few years ago, she had pawned it to cover the company's cash flow. Later, she wanted to redeem it but couldn't find it. Unexpectedly, Dylan found it, but the next second, he threw it directly into the sea and then chased after someone without looking back. No, Elizabeth failed to intercept and, covered in wounds, leaped over the railing. She struggled in the sea for 3 hours. The moment her wounds touched the seawater, the pain intensified tenfold, yet Elizabeth persisted, gritting her teeth until exhaustion finally led her to find it. The person climbed onto the deck in a disheveled state, panting heavily, clutching the necklace tightly in hand. A flood of memories surged forth. Back when she pawned this necklace, Dylan had promised to ensure she'd never want for anything in this life and to love her alone. Now, it had all turned into a cruel joke. She couldn't help but throw her head back and laugh. Yet, as she laughed, she couldn't hold back the tears, her heart aching as if shattered into pieces. Upon returning home, Elizabeth developed a high fever, lying weakly in bed. She could barely muster the strength to get up and pour a glass of water. Just as Dylan returned, he dragged her up abruptly. Elizabeth thought he was taking her to the hospital and obediently got into the car. Halfway there, she sensed something was wrong. "Dylan, this isn't the way to the hospital. Where are we going?" "The hospital," Dylan scoffed sharply and snapped. "You haven't even cleaned up the mess you made. How dare you mention the hospital?" Elizabeth was already in a daze and couldn't immediately grasp the meaning of his words, only realizing it when they arrived at the scene. So it was still about Georgia. Due to the escalating public opinion, many netizens launched relentless personal attacks against her. Georgia had no choice but to submit her resignation and move out of the villa overnight, returning to her old residence. At this very moment, she was about to jump off the building. Dylan took Elizabeth to the rooftop. Georgia immediately stepped back in panic. "Don't come any closer, Georgia. Don't act impulsively." Dylan was so anxious his hands were trembling as he pleaded. "I've brought her here. Elizabeth says she wants to apologize to you and will publicly clear your name online." An apology, publicly clear her name. Elizabeth immediately became more alert upon hearing this. Impossible. She endured the discomfort and said, "Why should I apologize to her? They were the ones who acted improperly first." Why should she, the victim, be the one to apologize? Upon hearing this, Georgia clenched her hands tightly, yet with a shattered expression, she said, "Yes, Mrs. Cleveland certainly doesn't need to apologize. It's my worthless life that deserves to be mocked and humiliated. I might as well be dead." Dylan was startled and exclaimed, "Don't." Then he turned to Elizabeth and growled, "How can you be so heartless? What's the big deal about apologizing?" No sooner had the words been spoken than he stretched out his foot and kicked. Elizabeth was caught off guard and fell to her knees, a sharp pain shooting through them instantly. The person looming above her threatened, "If you don't apologize and set the record straight, I'll have no choice but to target your father's company." Elizabeth suddenly recalled the suffering from her past life. Holding back tears, she looked up and said, "Dylan, after all these years of feelings between us, can they still not compare to a single Georgia?" This question was asked on behalf of the previous life's Elizabeth. A full decade of emotions, they had suffered and been happy together, yet in the end, it resulted in a broken home and lost lives. Dylan paused briefly but quickly resumed his cold interrogation. "Are you going to apologize or not? Did she have any choice besides apologizing?" Elizabeth let a tear fall and spoke through gritted teeth. "Miss Lynn, I'm sorry. I'll clarify everything right now." Then she took out her phone and posted a clarification announcement. Dylan watched her finish, then immediately walked over to Georgia, coaxing softly, "Georgia, you heard her, right? Come down quickly, sweetheart." Then he reached out and helped her down. Elizabeth watched this scene, her heart aching intensely. Just as she steadied herself against the wall, Georgia stepped forward, took her hand, and said gratefully, "Mrs. Cleveland, thank you." But behind Dylan's back, she smiled smugly and added in a low voice, "As a fellow woman, don't you think you're pathetic?" Elizabeth was furious and tried to shake off her hand, but Georgia held on even tighter, pulling her back several steps until they both stumbled toward the edge of the railing. A simultaneous scream. Dylan hurriedly tried to grab hold, but only managed to catch Georgia's hand, while Elizabeth fell down completely. At the moment of the fall, memories of the two flashed through her mind like a revolving lantern. In the end, he still chose Georgia. Suddenly opening my eyes, I found myself lying in a hospital. Elizabeth didn't die, because the old building was only 4 stories high, and with the awning as a buffer, she miraculously survived. But 3 ribs were broken, and it hurt with every breath. "Honey, you're finally awake." Dylan rushed over upon hearing the news, looking exhausted as if he hadn't slept for days. "Now Georgia can rest easy too. You have no idea how guilty she's been feeling." And the shock made her unable to eat for days, so he had been taking care of Georgia these past few days. Elizabeth withdrew her hand and sneered coldly, "With your thoughtful care, she's bound to live a long life." Dylan paused, his eyes darkening. "Must you always speak like this? Georgia is my subordinate, struggling alone in a foreign place. It's only right that I look after her. Besides, if it weren't for you, would she have had to suffer like this?" In the end, it still became her fault. Elizabeth closed her eyes, unwilling to argue with him any further. At that moment, Georgia called, "Dylan, where have you gone? I'm so scared being alone." "Don't be afraid, I'll be right back." Dylan hurriedly stood up, then sighed as if remembering something and added, "Elizabeth, you have me and the best medical team, but Georgia has nothing. Please stop being so hard on her all the time." Then he walked out of the ward without mercy, but she had already lost him long ago. In the following days, Dylan never came again, but she didn't care at all anymore. Instead, she cooperated with the doctors to quietly recover until she could be discharged healed. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, something happened at the company. Elizabeth was called back for a meeting. Georgia had leaked confidential business information to a partner, and the board unanimously demanded that Dylan fire her. "I really didn't mean to," Georgia cried until her eyes were red. Yet no one showed her any sympathy. Instead, they continued their accusations with unwavering certainty, stirring a wave of condemnation in the room. "Enough," Dylan spoke with a cold expression. "I believe Georgia didn't do it on purpose. Moreover, I've decided to transfer 20% of my shares to her. She is now a shareholder, not an employee, and no one has the right to fire her." Hearing this, Elizabeth was stunned. She accompanied him through 10 years of struggle to earn just 20%. Yet Georgia effortlessly received his 20% gift in less than a month. Back then, he said controlling shares would belong only to the two of them. Now, to protect Georgia, he resolutely shares this right with a third party, just like their marriage. His love no longer belonged solely to her, but had shifted to Georgia, and it burned even more intensely than what he'd given her. Elizabeth lowered her eyes with a soft chuckle. Yet her nails dug deep into her palms as she swallowed every ounce of heartache. With his protection, the board had no grounds to protest. As the shareholders left one after another in resignation, she rose to depart, only for two police officers to enter the room. "Hello, we've received a report alleging that your company's Georgia has stolen and sold trade secrets. Is this person currently on the premises?" The air froze instantly. Georgia hid behind Dylan, hooking his finger to signal for help. Dylan remained silent for a long moment before suddenly speaking up. "It wasn't her." All eyes turned to him. Then we heard him say, "We've already investigated this matter internally. It wasn't Georgia who did it. The real mastermind is Elizabeth." As soon as the words fell, he pointed at Elizabeth. The world seemed to freeze in that instant. "What did you say?" Elizabeth looked utterly incredulous, her voice trembling. "Say it again. Who was it?" Dylan walked up to her and took her hand. He whispered soothingly, "Georgia would be finished in the industry if she got a criminal record, but you're different. You have me. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. Don't worry, I'll get you out as soon as possible." Then he turned and handed a USB drive to the police, declaring self-righteously, "This is the evidence we've gathered. It confirms that Elizabeth was the one who did it. Even the false evidence was prepared. She had nowhere to escape." Elizabeth felt her blood freeze in an instant, a chill rising from the soles of her feet to the pit of her heart. She shook off his hand, glaring at Dylan with tear-filled eyes. 5 years ago, during that grand proposal, he had also vowed to support her for a lifetime. "So that's what it means." "Elizabeth, how pathetic you are." In the interrogation room, Elizabeth found herself unable to defend her innocence, no matter how many times she explained. The interrogator paid no heed and confined her to the detention center to await judgment. As soon as she entered the dorm, everyone turned to look at her. A short-haired woman with a toothpick in her mouth called out to her, "Newbie, first bow to the boss." The boss she mentioned was sitting on the bed. The person had a buzz cut. With fierce and sharp eyes, staring straight at her, Elizabeth hadn't even opened her mouth when the short-haired woman abruptly kicked her knees, forcing her to the ground. Then she spat at her, moving so slow, "You wanna die." Meanwhile, the woman on the bed strode over, yanking her up by the hair with a hoarse voice. "So you're the one stealing men from my little sister. Not bad-looking, I'll give you that." Hearing this, Elizabeth understood instantly. "Enduring the pain," she replied. "Georgia told you that. Get this straight, she's the one who's the other woman." Slap. As soon as the words left her mouth, she was struck with a slap. "I know very well, just as my sister said, the one who isn't loved is the real third wheel. Otherwise, Mr. Dylan wouldn't have agreed to send you here to learn some manners." Boom. Elizabeth's mind went blank instantly. So, this was Dylan's intention all along. She thought her heart had already died. Yet the tears she'd held back all day finally streamed down. Before she could recover, the man patted her face again. "These 3 days, they'll teach you the rules properly." As soon as the words were spoken, Elizabeth was dragged aside. On the first day, they mixed sand and gravel into her food, forcing her to swallow every bite. On the second day, they hung her beside an iron bed, using her as a human punching bag, kicking and beating her for training. On the third day, they stripped her naked and savagely abused her body. Those 3 days inside were like a nightmare to her. When she was released on bail, she was completely dazed, so much so that she didn't even realize she had boarded the wrong car. The man who claimed to be Dylan, the lawyer, was actually sent by the collaborating party. Dylan forced him to give up the appeal by pressuring his company into bankruptcy. That's why he fought like a cornered beast. Not only Elizabeth, but even Georgia was kidnapped. After a long, bumpy ride, the car finally stopped. They were dragged out and taken to an abandoned dock. Elizabeth recognized him at a glance. "Mr. Gordon." Her heart sank as she tried to reason with him. "Don't act rashly. We can discuss everything." Gordon let out a cold laugh, his eyes filled with hatred. "Discuss? If things were truly negotiable, Dylan wouldn't have been so ruthless as to go this far. You were the ones who leaked the secrets first. Yet you still pushed me into a corner. Since you won't let me live in peace, then today, we'll all die together." After roaring, he immediately called Dylan. "Dylan, both your women are in my hands. You have 1 hour to gather 100 million in cash and bring it to me. Otherwise, I'll burn one and drown the other." "How dare you?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, followed by Dylan's icy voice. if they suffer even a scratch. I'll make sure you live a fate worse than death." Gordon burst into laughter. "Mr. Dillon, you're in no position to threaten me now. 1 hour, I'll be waiting." After hanging up, they were immediately tied up. Elizabeth was suspended over the sea, while Georgia was held hostage in his grip. Surrounded by spilled gasoline, in less than an hour, Dillon arrived. His gaze swept over Elizabeth and Georgia, finally settling on Gordon, commanding, "Gordon, release them." Gordon let out a cold laugh. "Mr. Dillon, times have changed. You'll have to listen to me now. Where's the money?" As he spoke, he tightened his grip around Georgia's neck. Dillon dared not resist, pushing a black suitcase toward him. 100 million. Release them immediately." Gordon had someone open it, and after confirming no tricks were played, he flashed a sinister smile. "I've changed my mind. Now you must choose between two. One lives, the other dies." Hearing this, Elizabeth felt her heart race wildly. She knew Dillon would definitely choose Georgia, although I had prepared myself to be abandoned by him. Even so, a pang of bitterness welled up in my heart. To my surprise, Dillon didn't hesitate and declared bluntly, "I won't choose, I want both of them." Elizabeth froze in an instant, but Georgia clenched her teeth in fury. Still sobbing, she spoke up. "Mr. Dillon, don't worry about me. It's all because of me that this disaster happened. Let me end it all." With that, she abruptly shoved the person behind her. Gordon stumbled, dropping the lighter in his hand. Instantly, flames erupted everywhere. Enraged, he pushed Georgia into the fire and then severed the rope suspending Elizabeth. Both of them were plunged into peril simultaneously. Elizabeth, as she fell into the sea, all she saw was Dillon rushing toward her with a horrified expression. But not for her, he was running to Georgia. "Georgia." Dillon charged into the flames and carried the fallen Georgia out. But Elizabeth sank to the bottom of the sea. In the end, he still made his choice. When she woke up again, Elizabeth found herself lying in an operating room. Dillon stood before her, his face filled with anger. "Elizabeth, why did you collaborate with Gordon to stage this act? Did you think you could deceive everyone flawlessly? I'm so disappointed in you." Elizabeth froze, completely baffled by his words. Dillon continued angrily, "Georgia has already told me everything. You couldn't bear taking the blame for her, so you orchestrated this scheme to harm her. How could you be so malicious?" Elizabeth felt her heart sink as she suddenly understood. But she didn't know what means Georgia had used to make Dillon believe this was her scheme. "It wasn't me. I didn't." Her voice hoarse from swallowing seawater, Elizabeth pushed herself up to explain, but Dillon only grew more furious. "Enough. Don't try to lie your way out of this." Her body stiffened. Elizabeth stopped speaking. Yeah, what is there for her to explain? No matter how much she explains, Dillon would unconditionally believe Georgia anyway, so why bother wasting her breath? "So what?" She raised her eyes and sneered. "How are you going to punish me for her this time?" The dismissive tone only fueled greater indignation. "Of course, blood must be paid with blood." Dillon's veins bulged with rage as he roared. "Georgia was burned because of you and urgently needs a skin graft. Now you'll give her your skin." At these words, Elizabeth froze. How could he be so cruel to her? "I don't want to." Elizabeth was about to jump off the bed, but the next second she was pinned down on the operating table by several bodyguards. Dillon coldly threw out another sentence, "This matter is not up for discussion." Then he turned and walked out. Immediately after, someone was pushed in, but as soon as the door closed, Georgia, who supposedly had severe burns on her thigh, got out of bed unharmed, a smug smile playing on her lips. She gave the doctor a meaningful glance, her voice laced with a chilling tone. "Begin now. Remember, not a drop of anesthesia. I want to watch as you slice her skin off piece by piece." The doctors and nurses exchanged glances but dared not disobey. However, Elizabeth was terrified. She struggled to escape but was firmly strapped to the operating table. The first cut of the knife on her skin sent a wave of excruciating pain through her entire body. "Ah!" Elizabeth let out a heart-wrenching scream, her body trembling uncontrollably from instinct. Beside her, Georgia burst into laughter. Like a devil from hell, he reveled in the sadistic pleasure derived from her agony. Then came the second cut, the third. The blade sliced through her skin inch by inch, blood streaming from the wounds and staining the operating table crimson. Elizabeth was drenched in cold sweat, her face deathly pale, yet she didn't cry out in pain or shed a single tear, because the more she screamed in pain, Georgia the more pleased she became. The surgery finally ended after the 99th incision was made, and Elizabeth passed out completely. When I woke up, I was already in the hospital room. My thigh was wrapped in thick layers of gauze, stained with blood. And it hurt unbearably with every movement. She stared blankly at the ceiling, her heart devoid of any emotion, silently counting the days left. Soon, just 5 more days, she could leave Dylan in 5 days. After that, Elizabeth rested quietly in the hospital. During this time, Dylan didn't visit her once, as if they had returned to their usual Cold War, leaving each other undisturbed. 4 days later, she was told she could be discharged. Elizabeth got out of bed with her weak body, picked up her things, and prepared to leave. As she passed by a certain ward, she heard George's sickly sweet voice coming from inside. "Dad and Mom, I'm fine now, all thanks to Dylan taking care of me these past few days. Oh, I forgot to introduce, he's my boss and also my boyfriend." Elizabeth suddenly stopped in her tracks. Through the slightly ajar door, she saw Dylan holding George's hand, speaking tenderly. "Taking care of you is only natural. Please entrust Georgia to me. I'll protect her for the rest of my life. You two must be tired from the trip. Tomorrow, I'll treat you to a nice day out." Georgia's mom couldn't stop smiling. "That's wonderful. Georgia is truly lucky to have a boyfriend like you." These words reminded Elizabeth of the past. Dylan had said to her parents with the same solemnity when he proposed, "Uncle and Auntie, please rest assured and entrust Elizabeth to me. I promise to protect her for the rest of my life." Now, his promises are as worthless as floodwaters. Elizabeth let out a scoff and walked out of the hospital without a trace of sorrow on her face. The day after returning home, Dylan came back. He rushed upstairs to take a quick shower, changed into casual yet presentable clothes, and before leaving, said, "I'll be away on a business trip for a few days. I'll bring you a gift when I return." After saying what he wanted, Elizabeth leaned in to kiss her forehead, but Elizabeth avoided it and replied, "Go ahead." Dylan paused for a moment, sensing something was off, but didn't dwell on it and left with a smile. As soon as he left, Elizabeth also stepped out and went straight to the Civil Affairs office. Receiving the divorce certificate filled her with immense relief. One copy went into her bag, while the other was mailed to the Cleveland family. She snapped her phone card in half, then got into the car. From now on, she was no longer Mrs. Cleveland. On the other side, Dylan had already picked up the people. Today he cancelled all his work to specifically accompany Georgia's family for a shopping trip. In the black Maybach, George's dad, George's mom had stars in their eyes. "Dylan, this car must be expensive, right? It doesn't look cheap at all. Dylan is a big boss. The car he drives definitely can't be shabby." It was their first time riding in a luxury car. The leather seats were soft and breathable, unlike the taxis they'd taken before, which were hard and made them sweat. But Georgia found it embarrassing to hear. She turned her head and gave a displeased look. "Dad, Mom, don't ask such impolite questions." George's dad, George's mom instantly hung their heads. They knew their daughter had landed a wealthy man, so they couldn't afford to lose their composure too much. "It's fine." Dylan turned the steering wheel and said with a smile, "Uncle and Auntie were just curious. I understand." Behaving like a gentleman, considerate and understanding, Georgia held his hand, her eyes filled with admiration and possessiveness. She absolutely couldn't let such a man slip away, but the situation that followed was still uncontrollable. Dylan first took them to a Michelin-starred restaurant for a 5-figure lunch, then to various luxury stores to buy clothes, bags, and jewelry. George's dad, George's mom went from exclaiming in surprise at the price tags to being speechless, and finally utterly dumbfounded. A single dish cost thousands, clothes tens of thousands, while bags and jewelry ran into hundreds of thousands. Any one item would give them bragging rights for ages back home. They wandered around, grabbing free petit fours here, pocketing complimentary gifts there. These places most despised such penny-pinching behavior, and their country bumpkin origins were obvious at a glance. Seeing Dylan frown slightly, an internal comparison arose. Elizabeth's parents had never acted like this. They were clearly more refined after all. Georgia could tell he was somewhat repelled and deliberately restrained her parents, eventually suggesting they have dinner at home to avoid further embarrassment. Back at the villa, George's dad and mom became even more unbearable. They had no idea their daughter was living so well. If they hadn't come this time, who knows how long that stubborn girl would have kept hiding it. The three of them started arguing in the kitchen. "Mom, Dad, you're going back tomorrow." Georgia leaned against the doorframe, munching on imported white strawberries while giving them the order to leave. Hearing this, the two immediately became displeased. you ungrateful brat. Now that you've climbed to a higher branch, you don't care about your parents' lives anymore. That's right, you heartless wretch. What do you know? As long as we haven't reached the stage of discussing marriage, we must be cautious. If I mess this up, I'll really have to go back and share your miserable life of hardship. All right, you'll leave tomorrow. Georgia took a firm stance and finally pulled out tens of thousands as travel expenses. Only then did the elderly couple reluctantly agree. Outside, Dylan was on the phone. His brother had seen them at the mall today but couldn't ask directly at the time, so he's now secretly calling to inquire. Bro, are you serious? No way, I just haven't had enough fun yet. Making the girl happy first means she'll make me happy in bed later. It's called paying it forward. After all, there were still so many positions they hadn't tried. Remembering George's figure, Dylan's lower abdomen tightened instantly, and his mouth went dry with desire. The next day, George's parents left early in the morning. Dylan returned to the office and noticed a package on his desk as soon as he walked in. It looked like it contained some kind of document. Just as he was about to pick it up, Georgia blocked his way. Leaning against the desk, she lifted her skirt and slowly slid her foot up his thigh, raising an eyebrow as she said, "Didn't sleep well last night, big brother. Need Georgia to help you perk up." Last night Dylan really didn't sleep well. Georgia, constrained by her parents' presence at home, deliberately played hard to get all evening, leaving him burning with unfulfilled desire all night, taking several cold showers to suppress it. Now that fire has been reignited, he grabbed Georgia's ankle, his eyes overflowing with lust. "You little temptress, confess, were you doing it on purpose last night?" Before she could finish speaking, the woman leaned in and kissed him, yet Dylan was utterly captivated by her charm. Her innocent appearance brimming with allure. Though he knew it was a game of playing hard to get, he willingly fell into her trap every single time. He could explore countless flavors in her. First came shyness, like a bud waiting to bloom. Then a gradual unfurling that drew him deeper, until finally she burned with passion, as if ready to consume him entirely. These experiences, Elizabeth could not give him. That's why he became almost madly obsessed, sparing no cost to get close to her. Indulging her, and making her his own, Dylan turned the tables and gripped the woman's neck. While deepening the kiss with wild intensity, he slid his hand under her collar, slowly caressing and teasing. Georgia instantly melted into a puddle. The two moved from the desk to the sofa, and finally pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window. As the bright sun rose, the office was filled with an intoxicating atmosphere and sounds. Afterward, Georgia leaned against his shoulder. Her voice hoarse yet sweet, she asked, "Brother, when can you give Georgia the stock transfer agreement you promised to sign?" Hearing this, Dylan paused abruptly. In the heat of the moment, to protect someone, he blurted out this promise, but soon regretted it. 20% of the shares, worth billions. This is not as simple as buying a bag. Beyond the money, it involves power and impacts the company's decisions and future. Elizabeth followed him for 10 years, contributing so much to the company, and only got 20%. Georgia, what right does she have? No matter how much he loves, he still has to weigh the pros and cons. He looked straight ahead, as if weighing the pros and cons, then replied, "I've been busy taking care of you and your parents these days and almost forgot about this. I'll follow up with the legal team again tomorrow." How many excuses has he come up with now? Georgia paused, feeling somewhat displeased but not daring to show it. He was the one who agreed to it in the first place. Could it be that he's trying to go back on his word now? It would have been fine if it hadn't been brought up, but now that it has, she can't just ignore it. She's determined to secure both the 20% stake in Mrs. Cleveland's position. Over the past month, Dylan's favoritism has given her the illusion that she could rise to the top at any moment, but she can't rush things. She needs to take it slow. For the next week, the two were inseparable. Georgia kept coming up with new ideas every day, endless cosplay and props at home, and trying out every possible spot at the office, all for thrilling experiences. But gradually, Dylan started to feel bored. One night, in the middle of it all, he realized the body beneath him no longer excited him as it once did. Everything had been explored, and the old craving was gone. After hastily finishing, he stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. He lit a cigarette, opened the chat interface with Elizabeth, and noticed the latest conversation was still from that dinner gathering. Somehow, his heart suddenly felt a bit unsettled. Thinking this, he sent a message, "Honey, I'm about to head back. Is there anything you'd like as a gift?" After a long while, There was still no reply from the other side. Dylan couldn't help but frown, recalling the unpleasantness from the other day. Could it be that the person was still sulking? Or perhaps the person had already gone to sleep, most likely asleep. He had intended to call to coax her, but the thought made him pause. Instead, he dialed the luxury store and instructed them to prepare a gift in advance. Only after giving these instructions did he return to the room to sleep. The next day, the two went to work together as usual. Georgia, as always, whenever they weren't too busy, she would drop hints, trying to recreate the wild passion of those previous days. But today, Dylan kept avoiding her, either pretending not to see her or calling subordinates to report work, feigning busyness until almost the end of the workday. When his office finally emptied, Georgia seized the chance to walk in. Dylan was leaning on the sofa with his collar slightly open, one hand resting on his forehead as he closed his eyes to rest, while his long legs stretched casually apart, exuding a lazy yet refined air. She deliberately stopped to admire it for a while. If we're talking about climbing the social ladder, this northern city is full of wealthy tycoons, but few can compare to him. Beyond money and status, his looks are 1 in 100, not to mention his intoxicating skills. Even if married, he's still highly sought after, and she must hold on to him even tighter. Thinking this way, Georgia quietly walked over, then crouched between the man's thighs, only to have her hand clamped just as she was about to pull down the zipper. "What are you doing?" Dylan narrowed his eyes, his expression slightly angry. Georgia couldn't help but freeze for a moment, then put on a flattering smile. "Brother, don't you want Georgia today?" Having said that, the person lowered their head, intending to take it in their mouth. But Dylan avoided it. He stared at Georgia's face, thinking she was no different from those women at the nightclubs, too wanton, only making one feel disgusted. He stood up and straightened his collar. With a disdainful glance at the person on the ground, he said, "I'm going home today, take a taxi back yourself." With that, he walked away without looking back, staring at the tightly shut door. Georgia shivered as she lay on the ground, a sense of crisis rising within her. This was the first time he had rejected her. Half an hour later, Dylan returned home. As soon as he entered, the house was empty and deserted, as if many things were missing. Even the air carried a faint musty smell of long absence. A sudden unease gripped him as he called out, "Honey." In the spacious house, there was no response except for the echo of his own voice. Dylan immediately pulled out his phone. Without hesitation, he dialed Elizabeth's number, once, twice, 3 times, until countless attempts, but each time he was met with the automated message that her phone was turned off. Frowning, he immediately rushed into the master bedroom. I discovered that half of the wardrobe was empty, even the cosmetics on the dressing table, and Elizabeth's all identification documents. Everything was gone. Even the wedding photo hanging above the bed had mysteriously disappeared at this moment. Dylan stood frozen in place, his heart racing uncontrollably. Elizabeth's belongings were all gone, and their disappearance could only mean one thing. She must have run away from home. Why on earth would she do that? Why had she left without a word, and where could she have gone? These questions swirled in his mind, leaving him utterly perplexed. Could it be because of Georgia? At this thought, his heart skipped a beat. But that shouldn't be the case. He had concealed it so well, and besides, Elizabeth had never questioned him about it. Was it during the skin graft surgery then? Looking back now, although she was in the wrong, his attitude at the time was too harsh. And that day when they returned home, Elizabeth's expression seemed off. She probably left in anger that very day, but these were just his personal speculations. To find out why, he needed to locate her first. Dylan asked each of Elizabeth's friends, but everyone said they hadn't seen her recently. Suddenly, he thought of the Douglas family, although Elizabeth rarely returned to her parents' home after a quarrel. This time she had packed so thoroughly that there was an 80 to 90% chance she had gone back to the Douglas family in the Southern District. Thinking this, he opened his contacts. He first dialed his father-in-law's number, but after several attempts, all he got were voicemail prompts saying the phone was off, just like Elizabeth's, and eventually, even his mother-in-law's was the same. Dylan grew increasingly uneasy with each call. He had a premonition that he'd been blocked. Even feeling that Elizabeth would disappear from his life. No, that couldn't be. No matter how fierce their arguments were, as long as they didn't divorce, they were still husband and wife. Probably Elizabeth was just too angry and was still waiting for him in South City to come and reconcile. Yes, he needed to make a trip to South City. Just as he was about to leave, the phone in his hand rang. But it wasn't Elizabeth or her parents. It was the security personnel he had hired, Mr. Dillon. "We've found the person," the voice on the other end of the line was panting, accompanied by faint moans. "He was hiding in a small town and is now under control." This person is referring to Gordon. During that kidnapping, he took advantage of the chaos to escape. Dillon has been holding a grudge ever since. He's both angry that Georgia got hurt and resentful about being played for a fool. He has secretly been sending people to search for him. He swore that if he could find the person, he wouldn't let him off easily, but now he has more important matters to attend to. Just as the words were about to be spoken, the voice on the other end continued. "Gordon confessed a lot after we beat him up. He said the person conspiring with him behind the scenes is named Georgia." Georgia. Dillon suddenly halted in his tracks. Beyond surprise, the sense of unease in his heart grew even stronger, prompting him to confirm once more. "Are you sure there's no mistake in the interrogation? It's not Elizabeth but Georgia." "It's Georgia." There was a pause on the other end, then a firm response. "Our interrogation methods cannot be wrong. As for the Elizabeth you mentioned, according to Gordon's confession, she should be the victim. It turned out to be Georgia." Dillon never expected that the one who cried thief would end up being the main culprit, and Elizabeth, he actually believed Georgia's words. Truly thought she colluded with Gordon to stage this act as revenge for that fall incident. Perhaps Elizabeth's departure is also related to her. At this thought, Dillon felt a surge of anger. With a sharp glare, he spoke into the phone. "Help me dig deeper. Georgia, what else has she been up to in the past month? Hurry, I want the results by tonight. I'll triple your fee." Hanging up, his hands trembled with lingering fury. In this moment, clarity struck him. Looking back over the past month, every conflict between him and Elizabeth seemed to trace back to Georgia. Could it be that Elizabeth really knows everything? As time passed by, Dillon sat alone on the sofa, waiting from dusk till night. Before any message arrived, Georgia showed up instead. The moment she entered, her face couldn't hide the excitement. She glanced around the room and, indeed, didn't see Elizabeth anywhere. Feigning unease, she said, "Brother, before leaving work, I tidied up your office and found this." With that, she handed over a red booklet. On it were printed the words "divorce certificate," the glaring characters painfully sharp to the eyes. "Divorce certificate." Dillon looked at it with trembling fear. After a long while, he finally reached out with trembling hands to take it and open it. His heart sank abruptly when he saw the contents. Dillon Elizabeth. What was written there were indeed the names of the two of them. So Elizabeth hadn't run away from home. She had already divorced him. But why was he unaware of it? Dillon felt both puzzled and fearful inside. Suddenly, he raised his eyes to scrutinize Georgia. His deep eyes burned with anger as he grabbed her wrist and demanded, "Why do you have this marriage certificate? Did you have something to do with this?" Dillon already had his suspicions about her, and now she's showing up with a marriage certificate. He was curious to know what she was up to. His anger intensified the force of his grip. Georgia frowned and said coquettishly, "I saw it in your office, and it was actually mailed to you a week ago. I thought it was from a client, but when I opened it, I found out it was a divorce certificate." "Brother, you're hurting me." She tried to free her hand, but Dillon still held on tightly, though his thoughts had already drifted far away. A week ago, was that the day he left? At that time, Elizabeth had said she would wait for his return, yet turned around and went to get a marriage certificate. She had planned to get a divorce early on. Dillon let go and took another look at the divorce date on the divorce certificate. That's right, it was that day. She wasn't angry because of the kidnapping incident. She had already been considering it a month earlier. But he needs to sign for the divorce to go through. Suddenly, he remembered that day. Elizabeth suddenly came to the company to find him and had him sign a property transfer agreement. So that wasn't a property transfer agreement, it's a divorce agreement. Did she already know everything at that time? At this thought, Dillon's heart suddenly ached, and his entire body's blood seemed to freeze instantly. Georgia, on the other hand, was overjoyed. She had always believed Dillon no longer had romantic feelings for Elizabeth, and the only reason he hadn't divorced her yet was out of respect for their years of marital bond. So when she saw this divorce certificate, words couldn't describe how happy she was. Her mind filled with visions of the glamorous and luxurious life she would lead as Mrs. Cleveland. Now, all that was left was for Dillon to give his approval. She was just about to broach the subject when Dillon's phone rang. "It's the security company calling. The investigation has yielded results." Dillon snapped back to attention. shooting a sharp glance at Georgia before walking out to the balcony to answer the call. Speak, the investigation about Georgia is clear now. She indeed has dirty hands behind the scenes. Over the past month, she's made numerous deals with various local thugs, all targeting Elizabeth. Hearing this, Dylan clenched his fists. He roughly guessed some possibilities but still couldn't figure out exactly what she had done, so he asked directly, what kind of deals did they make? Explain everything clearly at once. The first time, she used your name to hire people to force Elizabeth to drink 99 bottles of strong liquor and nearly succeeded in raping her. The second time, she hired a private investigator to take numerous photos with you, then bribed staff to expose all the photos at the annual meeting of the Cleveland family group, while also privately sending them to the media. The third time, she sold Gordon Company's research data to his competitors, making a huge profit. The fourth time, she bribed inmates and guards in the detention center to lock Elizabeth in the same cell with someone who had homosexual tendencies, tormenting her for 3 days. The fifth time, she contacted Gordon and planned that kidnapping for him, promising to help him get the money and escape. The sixth time, she bribed the hospital doctors to diagnose herself with burns requiring skin grafts, and during the surgery, she didn't administer anesthesia to Elizabeth, brutally cutting her skin without it. Each incident was more shocking and horrifying than the last. Dylan felt as if he were there in person, witnessing Elizabeth's suffering firsthand. His face turned as pale as paper, trembling uncontrollably, his eyes bloodshot with fury. Georgia, you've really outdone yourself. Indoors, Georgia remained unaware of her exposure, but the look Dylan had just given her, fierce and seemingly laced with anger, left her unsettled and puzzled as to why. Had she done something wrong? Could it be because she brought the divorce papers? Dylan temporarily couldn't accept it and took his frustration out on her. This is all I can think of. Dylan's stunned expression just now must have been because he never expected Elizabeth to divorce him. Just as unbelievable as when she saw the divorce papers. I thought it would take more time to make them divorce. But unexpectedly Elizabeth gave up first. I suppose her schemes finally took effect. Indeed, what woman could endure such things? It's bad enough that the husband cheated, but to repeatedly hurt me in order to protect another woman, even the deepest love will eventually turn to utter disappointment. Elizabeth was exactly like that. At this thought, Georgia curled her lips into a smile, overjoyed at having won. As long as she kept everything hidden, she would soon take Mrs. Cleveland's place. At that moment, Dylan walked in, carrying a chill with him. His jawline was tensed into a sharp angle, and the veins bulging at his neck resembled coiled vipers, faintly pulsing with his restrained breaths. But Georgia was still lost in her joy, completely oblivious to the man's change. She continued to feign innocence and probed, "Brother, Mrs. Cleveland actually divorced you behind your back. What are you going to do about it?" "I won't divorce her." Dylan's response was unexpected. Georgia paused, her nails digging deep into her flesh, a sense of unwillingness hidden beneath her calm expression. She immediately retorted, "But you're already divorced. She just doesn't love you anymore. Why cling to it? You'd be better off cherishing the person right in front of you." Span. That person right in front of him was herself. Dylan curled his lips coldly, pinched her chin and asked in a low voice, "The person before your eyes? Then tell me how to cherish her. How about marrying her as Mrs. Cleveland? Can I?" Georgia's eyes instantly lit up, just like when they first met. He had been fooled by those very eyes, mistaking her for an innocent girl, only to discover she was a ruthless and scheming viper. Of course not. Dylan's eyes darkened with rage as he gripped her neck. With bloodshot eyes, he roared, "You're nothing but a caged canary I raised. Who gave you the audacity to covet Elizabeth's position and repeatedly harm her?" Suddenly, a suffocating sensation overwhelmed her. Georgia was lifted by Dylan, her heels leaving the ground instantly. Her whole body reacted reflexively, thrashing desperately but to no avail. Fear, panic, and helplessness. She wanted to speak but couldn't utter a word. Even her breathing became increasingly difficult. Just as she was about to faint, Dylan regained a shred of reason and loosened his grip. Her body instantly went limp as she collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. Tears uncontrollably streamed down her face as Georgia trembled, lifting her head to argue, "Brother, what are you talking about? I don't understand. How could I ever hurt Mrs. Cleveland? You must have misunderstood something." Still wearing that pitiful expression, had he not known the truth, he might have been fooled again. Just like every time Elizabeth was framed, Thinking back now, it was utterly detestable. Dylan crouched down, radiating a menacing aura like a demon, with no intention of wasting words on her. Instead, his face darkened as he said, "Since you don't understand, let me jog your memory, you'll get it soon enough." After speaking, he dragged the person into the wine cellar. Bottle after bottle of wine, Dylan poured into George's mouth while asking, "How does it taste? Can you remember now?" "No." "Stop." Georgia was forced to drink until she was completely disoriented. Her throat was so sore she couldn't make a sound, and her stomach churned with excruciating cramps until she vomited uncontrollably. Dylan finally stopped. But the next second, a group of rough men barged in. Seeing their ravenous, thirsty gazes, Georgia panicked instantly and pleaded, "I remember now, don't do this to me." But her pleas were already too late. Dylan stood up, wiping his hands as if he had touched something filthy, then walked heartlessly toward the door without sparing her a single glance. Georgia wanted to chase after him, but after just a few steps, someone tripped her, sending her crashing to the ground. The sound of raucous laughter above made her skin crawl. She still wanted to run, but her foot seemed to be twisted. The moment she tried to push herself up, the pain was unbearable, so she resorted to crawling toward the door. No matter what, she had to escape this place, otherwise, a nightmare awaited her. And those rough men were like a pack of vicious dogs. They stood by, drooling, their eyes filled with the cruel amusement of toying with prey. Following her at a leisurely pace, just as she was about to reach the door, they dragged her back again, repeating the cycle over and over until, finally tired of their game, they pinned her down, then set up a camera nearby. "Let me go." Georgia struggled desperately. One of the men slapped her hard, spat in her face, and said, "Behave yourself. It's not like you haven't been played with before. Stop pretending to be some chaste woman, damn it." The person lying on the ground was beaten into a daze. She had already been drinking, and now her head was buzzing so loudly that everyone she saw appeared as double images, and as soon as the camera turned on, the nightmare began. Those men tore off her clothes, then each unbuckled their own belts. Without any foreplay, they went straight in, one after another, treating the person beneath them as nothing more than a tool for venting their desires, devoid of any emotion. But Georgia couldn't withstand the impact. Instinctive moans escaped her lips continuously. This was the first time she felt such shame and helplessness. It wasn't until midnight that the muffled groans abruptly ceased. Georgia lay in utter disarray, like a discarded rag in a cellar, her body too broken to move even an inch before she finally collapsed into unconsciousness. When I woke up again, the sky was just beginning to lighten, but she wasn't in the cellar anymore. She'd been taken to that abandoned dock. The scene of the kidnapping played out once more, only this time, it was her turn to make the choice. Georgia, as soon as she opened her eyes, she saw her father hanging in the middle of the sea, while her mother was bound hand and foot, lying unconscious on the ground. "Dad, Mom," she cried out hoarsely. George's dad, George's mom. The effects of the drug on them had just worn off, and as they groggily opened their eyes, they were startled by the scene. "Georgia, save me." George's dad was terrified by the waves beneath him, trembling uncontrollably, while George's mom was so frightened she couldn't speak, crying helplessly. At that moment, Dylan appeared from behind. He coldly observed the scene before him, then slowly walked up to Georgia, looking down at her. "Choose one. Do you want to save your dad or your mom?" Georgia raised her head, her eyes brimming with tears. She never expected Dylan to be so heartless. Punishing her was one thing, but now he wouldn't even spare her parents. She thought he was an angel, but he turned out to be a devil. "Mr. Dylan." She crawled forward a few steps, clutching Dylan's pant leg, pleading desperately, "Mr. Dylan, I was wrong. I can apologize to Mrs. Cleveland, but please, please spare my parents, don't hurt them." "Apology?" Dylan sneered coldly. Then he said with extreme disdain, "Don't you dare taint Elizabeth's eyes. I'll go apologize to her myself, but before that, I need to give her an explanation, and you, not a single debt shall go unpaid." Dylan kicked the person away. With a cold expression, he asked, "Speak, which one will you save?" Georgia vigorously shook her head. How could she possibly choose? They were her biological parents, although she had previously looked down on them. Blood is thicker than water. She had to save both. Seeing her hesitate to make a decision, Dylan sneered mockingly. "Is it really that hard to choose? Since you can't decide, I'll choose for you." As soon as he finished speaking, he made a gesture. George's mom was instantly surrounded by raging flames, while the rope suspending George's dad was severed. sending him plunging into the sea, exactly replicating the scene she and Elizabeth had once endured. Georgia stared with bloodshot eyes. No. Georgia struggled to her feet, trying to rush into the sea of flames, but before she could run far, Dylan stopped her. He held her tightly, then cupped her face, forcing her to stare unblinkingly ahead. Her father flailed a few times before losing all hope and sinking into the sea, while her mother screamed her name in agony amidst the raging flames. "Dad, Mom," Georgia shrieked hysterically. Dylan did it on purpose, deliberately making her witness her parents' horrific deaths with her own eyes. While she could only watch helplessly, enduring endless torment and anguish, suddenly, Georgia thudded to her knees on the ground. The person was frightened into a daze, kowtowing while repenting. "I'm sorry, I was truly wrong. I shouldn't have incited Gordon to kidnap Elizabeth, nor should I have framed her. Please spare them." Each kowtow grew louder than the last. Only when her forehead was scraped raw and blood trickled down her face did Dylan nod to have the fire extinguished. Finally, George's dad was gone. George's mom was rescued midway, but 70% of her skin was burned. Georgia couldn't bear it and fainted. When she woke up again, she was already in the hospital. She smelled a strong odor of disinfectant, and the overhead light made it hard for her to keep her eyes open. Awake, the familiar voice sent a shiver down her spine. Georgia squinted and turned her head to the side, only then noticing several doctors and nurses standing nearby. "And there's cold noodles. Dylan, is she in the operating room?" Thinking about Dylan's next move, Georgia immediately sat up in fright, then quickly got off the bed and knelt beside him, shaking her head and choking back sobs. "No, please, brother, I was wrong. For the sake of the time I've spent with you, could you spare me this once?" Georgia tilted her head back, tears streaming down her face, like a puppy about to be abandoned, begging for its owner's last shred of mercy. Dylan gently touched her face, though his gaze seemed softer. His eyes remained cold as he slowly said, "Darling, didn't I say not a single one can be missing? Don't bargain with me." As the words fell, Georgia instantly felt disheartened. It was as if a chill ran through her entire body, making her shiver uncontrollably. Then she suddenly burst into laughter. "Dylan," she roared, baring her teeth in anger, "what right do you have to seek Elizabeth's revenge on me? Don't forget, it was you who first lusted after my body, unable to resist me every night. The harm I caused her was with your permission. How dare you absolve yourself of all blame? It was you who abandoned love for lust and betrayed Elizabeth first. If you truly loved her so much, why would she leave you without a word? Because she saw through you. You're nothing but a coward, sneaking around while fearing your wife might find out, and when the truth comes out, you blame it all on me. How could I have been so blind to fall for a man like you?" Georgia decided to burn all bridges. She knew very well in her heart that Dylan wouldn't let her off this time. Since that was the case, she might as well speak her mind. Mutual disgust was better than her suffering alone, and Dylan was indeed struck. Furiously gripping George's chin, the fury burning in his eyes seemed ready to consume her. "You're just someone I play with. The years of feelings between me and Elizabeth aren't for you to judge. You were too greedy, coveting Elizabeth's position. Did you really think sleeping together a few times would get you there? Humph, wishful thinking. If you had known your place, I could have ensured you a worry-free life, but you dared to hurt her. Don't blame me for turning my back on you." With that, he flung her away violently. Georgia fell to the ground, still reeling from Dylan's words when she was forced onto the operating table, her earlier arrogance instantly deflated. "No, let me go." Georgia struggled desperately, because she had witnessed with her own eyes Elizabeth being skinned alive without anesthesia, the kind of agony worse than death. The triumph she felt then was now matched only by utter despair. Before long, she was strapped to the operating table. Dylan sat coldly in the observation room, as if watching a routine surgery, his eyes devoid of any emotion. Once all preparations were complete, he picked up the microphone beside him and calmly instructed, "No anesthesia. Whatever the extent of Mrs. Lynn's burns, graft that much skin, let this mother-daughter bond be fulfilled, just make sure she stays alive." George's mom had burns covering 70% of her body, performing the entire procedure without anesthesia, brutally removing 70% of the skin. "How is this any different from death by 1,000 cuts?" The lead surgeon gasped in shock, yet he dared not disobey, as Dylan held compromising evidence against him. His future prospects also depended on Dylan's support, leaving him no choice but to prioritize his own interests. After some deliberation, he made the first cut. Georgia, her features instantly contorted in pain. The physical pain was 100 times worse than she had anticipated. Elizabeth, how had she endured it? Then came the second cut, the third cut, until both her thighs were a bloody mess, with no way to tell how many cuts had been made. At first, Georgia pleaded for mercy, then descended into hysterical curses, and finally screamed until her voice was hoarse and her body exhausted. Only then did true regret begin to take hold in her heart, but this realization came far too late. She grew up in poverty, and through great effort managed to leave the countryside to attend university in the city, only to be dazzled by its glamour and wealth. Thinking she could trade shortcuts for a lifetime of riches, she never realized she was being played until nothing remained. Dylan watched with reddened eyes from the observation room. But it wasn't out of sympathy for Georgia, rather, her suffering reminded him of Elizabeth, how much pain she must have been in at that time, yet this pain was something he had personally brought about, when he first learned the truth. Just hearing the description was hard for him to accept. Now, witnessing it firsthand, his heart felt as if it were being tightly gripped, suffocating and aching. He didn't dare to think any further, suddenly standing up. I no longer had the courage to continue watching and turned to leave the observation room. After the surgery, Georgia was practically disabled. The person lay on the hospital bed, their entire body wrapped in bandages, barely breathing. As a silent tear rolled down their pale face, but this was not yet her end. To help Elizabeth clear her name, Dylan handed over evidence of her leaking company secrets to the police. Once she wakes up, she will face legal consequences. After leaving the hospital, Dylan also found himself in trouble. Rumors spread that he had misconduct, condoning his lover's theft of business secrets from partners, and was heartless enough to push his wife, who had built everything from scratch with him, to take the blame. The entire internet erupted in an uproar. The common people cursed him as heartless and ungrateful. Business partners lost trust in him, and rival companies took the opportunity to kick him while he was down, purchasing more damaging information to exaggerate the scandal. The Cleveland Group's stock plummeted as a result. The PR department tried every means to suppress the trending topic, but it seemed someone was working against them, continuously manipulating public opinion, keeping the heat only rising. In the end, an emergency shareholders meeting was called. Dylan was on his way to the airport when a phone call summoned him back to the company. At the board meeting, shareholders voiced their condemnations one after another. Sitting in the high seat with a darkened expression, his already irritable mood grew even more volatile. The Cleveland family's empire was built through my hard work. How could it collapse so easily? You all stayed silent while enjoying the benefits, and now you're unsettled by the slightest stir. He didn't take this matter seriously at all. Since the company was founded, there's no storm or hardship he hasn't weathered, and each time he's only emerged stronger. Right now, his mind is completely occupied by Elizabeth. If not for these people standing in his way, she might already be in South City by now. At this thought, Dylan stood up, speaking in a leader's tone. He said, I will give everyone an explanation regarding this incident, but I have urgent matters to attend to now. You're welcome to stay and continue the discussion if you wish. Such arrogance left the shareholders deeply dissatisfied. Yet no one dared to voice their anger, for Dylan was the largest shareholder, leaving them with no choice but to obey. At that moment, a voice came from outside the door. Hold on, the shareholders' meeting cannot conclude yet. The low murmurs of conversation abruptly ceased. In the conference room, all eyes turned toward the door in unison. With a steady push of the door, a man in a tailored suit walked in, leading a team of professional lawyers behind him, their steps precise and chilling. Why is it him? This person Dylan knew. He is the Secretary General of the Lennon family group and the assistant to the Lennon family heir Julian. Gary walked up to him and stopped. With a serious expression, he said, Sorry, Mr. Dylan, the shareholders' meeting hasn't concluded yet. You can't leave now. I need to announce a decision on behalf of our Mr. Julian. Dylan was somewhat confused by what he heard. Curling his lips into a smile, he said, Secretary Gary, you must be mistaken. This is the shareholders' meeting of our Cleveland family group. Are you in the wrong place? The Lennon family may hold great power, but this is not Julian's territory to act recklessly. Gary smiled and said, It won't be for long. What? Dylan was stunned, sensing something amiss. Then he heard Gary continue, Mr. Julian is now the largest shareholder of the Cleveland family's conglomerate. From today onward, This company no longer bears the surname, and you are hereby removed from your position as CEO. Someone will be appointed to take your place." With that, he handed over 2 documents. One was a share transfer agreement, proving Julian's current shareholding origins. The other document was a notice of termination of employment. The lawyers then sprang into action, distributing these 2 documents to the shareholders present. The scene instantly erupted like a pot of boiling grasshoppers, with waves of discussion rising and falling. Dylan stood frozen in place, his eyes filled with disbelief. He snatched Gary's document and carefully examined its contents. Julian actually holds 50% of the shares. It turns out he had been planning this all along, secretly acquiring 20% of the shares, and then took advantage of the recent public opinion turmoil to gather another 10% from the market at low prices. As for the remaining crucial 20%, it was actually Elizabeth who transferred it. Yet he only holds 40% of the shares, just as Gary said. From today onward, the Cleveland Families Corporation will no longer bear the Cleveland surname. The paper in his hand suddenly fell to the ground. Dylan staggered back a step, nearly losing his balance. Elizabeth, why? He never would have thought that Elizabeth would actually sell the shares. This was their shared effort, their collective heart and soul, but it also precisely proved she truly wanted nothing to do with it anymore. Neither him nor her should have the company that they've worked tirelessly for countless days and nights to build. No, he couldn't accept this outcome. He grabbed Gary by the collar and demanded, was it Julian who pulled strings behind the scenes to swindle those 20% shares from Elizabeth? She was deceived, wasn't she? Dylan's eyes were filled with longing, yearning for an answer from him, one that would allow him to continue deceiving himself. But Gary had no obligation to comfort him. Without concealment or exaggeration, he reported truthfully with a serious expression, it was Miss Elizabeth who approached Mr. Julian and transferred it at 30% below the market price. 30% below the market price. This can't be. Dylan powerlessly loosened his grip. Compared to losing the company, he now feared losing Elizabeth completely even more. Back when the company faced a crisis, someone offered to buy it at a high price. He wavered. But Elizabeth refused and even had a big argument with him over it. She said the company was their second home. As long as the company exists, home remains, and no one is allowed to talk about giving up. Yet now she has sold it off at a low price. First the divorce, then selling her shares. Could it be Elizabeth really wants no further ties with him? No, it can't be like this. Dylan didn't want to admit this fact, even believing that Elizabeth must have had her reasons. Perhaps she encountered trouble after returning to South City and urgently needed money. He had to go to South City himself to ask. South City, located in the CBD, is home to the Lennon Families Corporation. In the spacious office, sunlight streamed in through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Julian picked up the pen beside him and swiftly signed his name, writing with swift strokes, yet never losing steadiness, just like the man himself, outwardly decisive and quick. Yet every step taken with solid footing. Elizabeth paused. Won't you take another look? Hearing this, Julian looked up, leaning back in the chair. He fixed his gaze on her with deep, penetrating eyes. Then, with a smile playing at the corners of his lips, he said, the content isn't what matters, it's you I'm investing in. As long as the right person is chosen, the content naturally won't fall short. Indeed, investing is ultimately about betting on people. And Julian's words carried immense weight. He's renowned in the investment banking world for his sharp eye. Being singled out and praised by him means that even if future collaborations don't materialize, other firms will be vying to invest. At this, Elizabeth felt both flattered and surprised. With a professional smile, she replied modestly, thank you for your kind words, Mr. Julian. I won't let you down and will strive to deliver the maximum return on your investment. All right. I'll be watching with interest. Julian stood up and extended his hand. I hope you can use the same drive that once defeated me to carve out your own path in South City. Pleasure working with you, Elizabeth. Elizabeth paused upon hearing this. Memories instantly flashed back to 3 years ago. 3 years ago, the Cleveland family group wanted to go public but still needed a major project to boost their efforts. It was at that time she and Julian simultaneously set their sights on the same project. At the time, she wasn't confident. After all, the Lennon family group could crush her as easily as stepping on an ant, yet she didn't back down. Instead, she poured all her energy into the bidding meeting, giving it her all, and ultimately won with an innovative proposal. earning Julian's admiration. Now, gaining his recognition could not only help the Douglas family's company break through its bottleneck but also allow her to start anew in South City. Elizabeth felt genuine gratitude from the bottom of her heart, snapping back to reality. She flashed a bright smile, reaching out for a handshake. "Pleasure working with you." As the sun gradually set, Elizabeth left the Lennon family group. Upon entering the house, the aroma of food greeted her. Elizabeth's dad was bringing out several dishes from the kitchen. Elizabeth's mom was curled up on the sofa watching TV, a heartwarming scene. "It smells so good." Elizabeth changed her shoes and walked into the living room. "I could smell the delicious aroma even before entering. I'm definitely having 2 bowls of rice tonight." Elizabeth's dad and mom both broke into smiles upon hearing this. "Elizabeth is back. Go wash your hands and eat, you little foodie. There's definitely enough rice for you. Your dad even made your favorite sweet and sour fish." 3 people sat around the table, chatting and laughing. Tonight's Elizabeth became much more lively, just like before, clinging to them playfully and joking around. Seeing their daughter regain her spirit, no longer looking as dispirited as when she first returned, Elizabeth's dad and Elizabeth's mom exchanged a glance and secretly sighed in relief. At that time, they had been truly frightened. At that time, the person came back with a pale face, said nothing, and slept in a daze for 3 days and nights. During this time, Elizabeth's mom secretly checked her body and found it covered in injuries, heartbroken to the point of staying awake all night. But they still pretended to know nothing. Silently, they made soup to nourish her body and stayed at home without going anywhere, fearing she might have thoughts of suicide. Later, Elizabeth regained some spirit and took the initiative to confess to them that she had gotten a divorce. She also instructed them not to contact Dylan anymore, saying nothing more beyond that. But they knew she must have been wronged, and at that moment they wished they could immediately fly to North City to demand an explanation. However, since their daughter had made it clear, they didn't want to drag things out further, so they simply blocked Dylan's phone number. Now, the storm has finally passed. As long as the family is healthy and happy, and they can share meals and laughter like this every day, they are content. "Dad, I've secured investment from Lennon's family." "Really?" Elizabeth's dad paused for a second, then beamed with joy. "My daughter is amazing. I always knew you could do it. I can rest assured leaving the company to you from now on." Perhaps it's due to his age. Elizabeth's dad no longer strives as hard as he did in his youth, which is why the company has stagnated. He originally planned to wait for his son to return from studying abroad and hand the company over to the younger generation for reform. Little did he expect his daughter's return would make his retirement dream come true ahead of schedule. His little scheme was seen through at a glance. "You're not allowed to bail out." Elizabeth's mom glared at him and commanded, "You go to the company obediently. Wait until our son comes back before you retire. Or what if our daughter gets exhausted?" "Ha ha ha, as you wish, my dear wife. See, I still can't escape your mom's sharp eyes." The elderly couple bantered playfully with each other. Seeing their parents still deeply in love brought Elizabeth immense comfort. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. The cheerful chatter stopped abruptly, just as the elderly couple wondered who it could be. Elizabeth stood up knowingly. "I ordered a cake when I came back. It must have arrived." With that, he walked out, but upon opening the door, he froze in shock. Why is it him? The person who arrived was none other than Dylan. His suit was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, looking as if he hadn't rested properly in a long time. Seeing him, Elizabeth immediately darkened her expression and, without a moment's hesitation, tried to shut the door, only for Dylan to block it with his hand the next second. Tisk. A red mark instantly appeared on his forearm. He sucked in a sharp breath, gritting his teeth to endure the pain, but Elizabeth showed no trace of pity. "Let go, honey." Dylan's voice was hoarse, as if suppressing countless emotions, trying to play dumb. "You came back to see Mom and Dad without telling me. I was worried when I couldn't find you." Hearing this, Elizabeth let out a cold laugh. Her eyes were full of mockery. "Mr. Dylan, I assume you've received the divorce certificate I sent you. Please restrain yourself and stop calling me that. I'm no longer your wife, and don't even talk about how worried you were when you couldn't find me. Weren't you supposed to be accompanying Georgia's family? How did you even have time to look for me? Aren't you afraid she'll get jealous if you come here?" Dylan gasped, his eyes surging with intense pain, his face filled with regret. Indeed, she knew everything. When she addressed him as Mr. Dylan so distantly, his heart felt as if it had been violently wrenched. And no, that's not how it is. His face pale, he didn't know where to begin explaining, but if he didn't clarify things now, he might never get another chance. In that moment, he was utterly restless. His guilty conscience making him almost incoherent, Elizabeth was utterly calm, even impatient. She had no time to stand foolishly at the door with him. Just as she was about to speak again to shoo him away, Elizabeth's mom heard the commotion and came out. Dylan instantly lit up. "Dad, Mom." It was as if he had seen hope, but Elizabeth's dad angrily shouted, "I'm not your dad." While she had always liked this son-in-law, Elizabeth's mom also changed her usual demeanor, coldly saying, "My daughter has nothing to do with you now, so don't you dare call me Mom. We didn't go to North City to settle scores with you, yet you have the audacity to come here. Do you think our old Douglas family is easy to bully, that I wouldn't dare do anything to you?" Elizabeth's dad grew angrier the more he thought about it. He randomly grabbed a broom nearby, shielding Elizabeth behind him, and pointed at Dylan while yelling, "Get out, don't stand at our doorstep and dirty our ground." Even while cursing, they struck him. Dylan flusteredly dodged, ultimately like a piece of trash, being mercilessly driven downstairs. Elizabeth stood behind her parents with tears in her eyes. How wonderful, this is the feeling of being protected. Only her parents would love her unconditionally. After driving away Dylan, everyone tacitly continued eating. Her parents didn't ask what had happened, and she didn't want to reopen those wounds. The family of three finished their meal, then ate fruit and watched TV together, discussing the characters and plot as if nothing had just happened. Elizabeth nestled in her mother's arms, eating fruit fed by her father. It was this very atmosphere of happiness that quietly soothed her wounds. After watching for a while, she went back to her room first. She had just secured Julian's investment and had a lot of work to handle. Tomorrow, she would also need to take people on a company tour and listen in on her upcoming arrangements. Now she didn't dare slack off in the slightest. Fired up with adrenaline, she was determined to achieve something remarkable as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Dylan hadn't left yet. He stood downstairs, the faint sounds of laughter coming through the window, piercing his heart deeply. In the past, every time he accompanied Elizabeth back to her parents' home, before the car had even come to a complete stop, her parents would already be standing downstairs, joyfully welcoming his arrival. But now he had been kicked out. Even the heavens seemed to disapprove, as a dull thunderclap echoed through the night sky, followed by a torrential downpour that drenched him from head to toe. Dylan didn't run for shelter from the rain. Instead, he remained standing there, soaked for a long time, too afraid to go back inside yet unwilling to leave. He gazed greedily at Elizabeth's room, wanting to watch over her until the lights went out, but unexpectedly, she appeared the next second. About to close the window, Elizabeth's hand paused briefly, but then she shut the window without hesitation. She couldn't even be bothered to spare him a glance. Dylan's heart was wrenched with pain as he stood in the rain, unable to calm down for a long time. The next day, Elizabeth went out early in the morning. No sooner had she stepped out the door than Dylan, lying in the car, woke up and immediately opened the car door, calling out in a hoarse voice to the retreating figure, "Wife." Just from the sound of his voice, it was clear he wasn't feeling well. He never left last night because he wanted to explain things to Elizabeth in person and seek her forgiveness as soon as possible, so he spent the night in the car. He caught a cold after getting drenched in the rain and catching a chill. Just as he was about to step out of the car, his feet hadn't even touched the ground when a wave of dizziness washed over him, nearly making him lose his balance. Hearing the sound, Elizabeth paused mid-step. Upon taking a closer look and realizing the person hadn't left, a surge of anger suddenly rose within. Just as I was about to shoo them away again, a gentle voice sounded from behind Elizabeth. It was Julian who had arrived, but why would he come here? Elizabeth was somewhat surprised. Without bothering with Dylan, she turned and walked toward Julian. "Mr. Julian, what brings you here?" The man leaned against the car hood, relaxed and casual. Unlike the sharpness of the previous 2 days, as you approached, you could catch the scent of sandalwood on him, blending into the morning air, making it exceptionally soothing. Julian stood up and said with a smile, "Didn't you invite me to visit the company? I happened to pass by this way and thought I'd pick you up to go together." After speaking, he walked to the passenger side and opened the door. "Just passing by." That excuse was barely believable. But how did he even know her home address? Elizabeth was puzzled but didn't dare to ask further. After all, Mr. Julian didn't seem to mind the trouble, so why not take the free ride? then I'll trouble Mr. Julian with it. She nodded without refusing. Completely forgetting about Dylan, the person watching from behind felt both hurt and jealous. Dylan stepped forward and stopped her. With a wary expression, he looked at Julian and said, Mr. Julian, we haven't interacted much before, but now I've witnessed your cunning firsthand. You used a media campaign to buy up shares at rock-bottom prices, taking over the company I founded, and now you're here eyeing my wife. Is this the so-called Lennon family's way of doing things? He was a man too. And no one understands men better than men themselves. Julian is famously known as the Ice King and has always kept his distance from women. If it weren't for his affection, there's no way he would go out of his way to pick up a woman. He didn't believe for a second that it was just a coincidence, yet Elizabeth found herself sweating nervously. She immediately spoke up to stop him. Dylan, don't go too far, otherwise. She didn't dare imagine what else he might say. The rest didn't matter much. But it couldn't affect her work, yet Julian wasn't angered. Instead, he scoffed. Wife, what right do you have to call her that now? These words instantly enraged Dylan. Without a word, he threw a punch directly at Julian's face to vent the frustration of the past few days. Julian was completely caught off guard. He staggered back a few steps, a trickle of blood immediately seeping from the corner of his mouth, yet his eyes gleamed with triumph. And of all people, it had to be Dylan who witnessed it. In an instant, the fury in his chest burned even fiercer. He took several steps forward, ready to strike again when Elizabeth resolutely stepped between them and slapped him across the face. Slap. The sound of the slap was sharp and piercing. Elizabeth was so angry her chest heaved as she shouted at him, Dylan, what's gotten into you this early in the morning? Dylan froze on the spot, then he looked up in disbelief. His eyes filled with hurt as he stared at Elizabeth, trembling as he spoke, Wife, I'm not your wife. Before he could finish, Elizabeth cut him off. If you harass me again, I'll call the police. With that, she helped Julian up, and the two got into the car one after another before driving straight away, not even sparing him another glance. Watching the car drive into the distance, Dylan felt a crack in his heart, tearing him apart with pain. So this is what being ignored feels like. Inside the car, the two fell into silence. Elizabeth sat in the passenger seat, nervously picking at her nails, her heart filled with unease. Just yesterday, they had signed the contract, and today Julian had taken a slap from her ex-husband. It was like suffering a setback before even starting, making her wonder how she could continue to operate in City N. Her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of how to make amends. Suddenly, she stopped the car. Mr. Julian, wait for me a moment. I'll be right back. After getting out of the car, she ran into a pharmacy. In less than 5 minutes, she returned to the car carrying a bag of medicine. Gazing sincerely at Julian, she said, Mr. Julian, let me help you treat your wounds. After speaking, she took out the iodine from the bag, then she dipped a cotton swab into it a few times, proactively moved closer to the person in the driver's seat, and gently wiped the corner of his mouth. While wiping, he apologized. I'm really sorry you got dragged into this for no reason. Please don't take what he said to heart. He just hasn't come to terms with the divorce yet. Lashing out at everyone and seeing you as an imaginary rival, I apologize on his behalf. At this moment, their bodies were very close to each other. Julian stared at her red lips, his heart pounding restlessly, his Adam's apple involuntarily bobbing. Will you get back together with him? Hearing this, Elizabeth paused and looked up. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and an inexplicable warmth filled the car. She immediately averted her gaze. Blushing, she replied, Of course not. She then pretended to tidy her things, trying to hide her nervousness. Hearing this, Julian smiled, adjusted his posture, and gripping the steering wheel said, If that's the case, then there's no need for you to apologize on his behalf. This statement Elizabeth didn't quite understand. What does apologizing have to do with whether she remarries or not? Just then, the person beside her added, Besides, he wasn't entirely wrong either. The car started up again and headed to the company. Along the way, Elizabeth kept pondering his words. Why did he say Dylan wasn't talking nonsense? If he wasn't talking nonsense, then did that mean Julian was actually coveting her? At this thought, she immediately stopped her speculation. This is absolutely impossible. Who is he? The heir of the top aristocratic family in South City, while she is at best a hardworking but divorced independent woman. Soon, the two arrived at Douglas's company. Elizabeth gave him a brief tour. This time, she wanted to expand the company's scale. Elizabeth's dad had competitive products and technology, but they lacked innovation. That's why Elizabeth had the idea for reform, although the money from selling shares could sustain operations, to achieve rapid and lasting development. Introducing capital would be inevitable, and the Lennon family group is the best choice. After getting a general understanding, Julian attended their internal meeting but had urgent matters to handle midway. So he left early and returned to the Lennon family group. Elizabeth held several consecutive meetings. After talking for a long time, she finally returned to her own office with a dry mouth to rest for a while. No sooner had she sat down than her assistant walked in. With a gossipy expression, she asked, "Manager Elizabeth, there's a Mr. Dillon downstairs who says he wants to see you." Not seeing him, Elizabeth darkened her face and coldly instructed, "From now on, whenever he comes again, have the security guards drive him out." In the following days, Dillon came every day. But each time he reached the building's entrance, he was stopped, and even ended up on the security room's blacklist. In the end, he wasn't even allowed to enter her residential community. Dillon kept hitting walls everywhere, and he didn't show up in the following days. Elizabeth thought he had retreated in the face of difficulties, but on this day, after working overtime, when she went down to the parking lot, she saw him again, and he even knocked her out. She was kidnapped by Dillon. When she woke up, she was in a large villa. Dillon kept her confined in the room. Though her hands and feet weren't bound, there was no way for her to escape unless she jumped from the balcony. Finally, she gave up struggling and slumped onto the edge of the bed. Dillon walked in carrying a tray of food, crouched down in front of her, and said softly, "Honey, you must be hungry. I had the kitchen prepare your favorite dishes." He spoke while arranging the bowls and chopsticks. Elizabeth lifted her gaze, but her eyes were filled with coldness. With a single motion, he overturned the meal, angrily saying, "You tied me up and brought me here. Do you intend to keep me as a pet?" She never expected him to go this mad. Dillon looked at the mess on the floor, choked up as he opened his mouth, and hoarsely said, "I didn't mean to kidnap you. I just wanted to see you, but you kept avoiding me. I had no choice but to resort to this. I just wanted to talk to you properly." "Talk? What is there to talk about?" Elizabeth's fingers trembled slightly as she struggled to compose herself before speaking. "Should we discuss why you fell for Georgia, or how you both conspired to hurt me?" The mere thought of it made her whole body shake. Dillon stood frozen in place, his bloodshot eyes filled with agony and remorse. "No," he said in a hoarse voice, as if suppressing countless emotions, "I don't like her. I just couldn't control my desires at the time. It was only later that I found out she had done so many things behind my back to hurt you. I've already made her pay the price. I'm sorry for making you suffer." Hearing this, Elizabeth curled her lips into a cold smile. All the past grievances and pain were brushed aside so lightly by him, even letting Georgia bear the blame alone while he absolved himself completely. She raised her eyes, her gaze filled with mockery. "So what? Do you think saying you didn't know can erase all the suffering I've endured this past month?" Dillon swallowed hard, his voice so low it was almost pleading. "I'm sorry, my love. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." He knelt on the ground like a devout believer, seeking Elizabeth's forgiveness. "Making it up?" Elizabeth curled her lips in a sarcastic smile. "Dillon, do you remember how you treated me time and again for Georgia's sake?" Dillon froze completely, her words sharp as knives, carved into his heart one by one. "At that dinner, you firmly believed I had Georgia sexually harassed, and after it ended, you had someone teach me a lesson. At the annual party, to vent her anger, you not only threw my family heirloom necklace into the sea but also forcibly dragged me to apologize to her, causing me to fall from a building and nearly die. During the confidential leak incident, to protect her, you didn't hesitate to push me out to take the blame, leaving me to spend 3 days in detention, living like neither human nor ghost. During the kidnapping, you believed her slander and firmly insisted I was the mastermind, strapping me to the operating table without anesthesia, cutting me 99 times. With every word she spoke, Dillon relived the memories in his mind, his face growing paler by the second. But Elizabeth didn't stop there. Instead, she lifted her skirt, revealing the large, gruesome scar on her thigh. It was absolutely horrifying. Dillon collapsed to the ground, reaching out as if to touch it, but withdrew his hand halfway. Then he clenched his fists and pounded them against the marble floor, blow after blow, until the backs of his hands were a bloody mess. Yet it was nothing compared to the pain in his heart. "I'm sorry." His voice was hoarse, his eyes red-rimmed. "Honey, please, give me one more chance," he spoke rapidly, as if afraid of being interrupted. "I'll repay you bit by bit for all the suffering you've endured. When your anger subsides, can we start over?" Elizabeth watched his agony with cold eyes. Just as the words of refusal were about to leave his lips, Dylan picked up a fruit knife nearby and, without a moment's hesitation, plunged it straight into his own thigh. The knife was pulled out, blood splattering all over the floor. Then came the second stab, the third, with each swift and decisive motion. He repeated the act as if impervious to pain, yet the cold sweat on his forehead dripped increasingly, his face turning a terrifying shade of pale. "Enough," Elizabeth roared, stopping him in his tracks. She was genuinely frightened. But after suppressing her panic, the coldness in her eyes grew even more intense. "Do you think hurting yourself in front of me will make up for anything? It only disgusts me." Hearing this, Dylan trembled. "It's not about making up for it." He raised his eyes, revealing a depth of unfathomable darkness. "It's what I owe you. I was inconsiderate. I shouldn't have let you witness such a bloody scene. There are still 90 cuts left. I'll finish them outside. This is what I must repay." With that, he stood up shakily. Then, enduring the pain, he limped out, leaving behind a winding trail of blood. With just a door between them, the two fell silent. Dylan seemed possessed, stabbing relentlessly, one blow after another, without a single cry of pain. Only the dull sound of the blade tearing through flesh, yet this sound was more piercing than any scream. Only when the knife clattered to the ground did this bloody debt come to an end. Elizabeth finally couldn't hold back and stepped out. Just a few steps away, Dylan lay exhausted in a pool of blood, his breathing becoming extremely faint. Seeing someone emerge, he mustered the strength to prop himself up again. With the last bit of willpower, he slowly crawled to Elizabeth's feet, looked up, and asked, "Honey, do you remember saying you'd give me one more chance?" Elizabeth certainly remembered. She had indeed promised him once. Back then, the Cleveland Families Corporation successfully went public. Dylan's net worth skyrocketed overnight. Combined with his good looks, he became the target of many women seeking to attach themselves to him. There was once when he nearly fell into a trap. Someone had drugged his drink, nearly causing him to lose control. In the end, he had to call Elizabeth, his rightful wife, to come to his rescue. At that moment, Elizabeth didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She even jokingly asked, "You managed to resist this time, but can you guarantee you'll resist every time in the future?" This, Dylan couldn't even promise. To remain untouched while surrounded by temptations is an immense challenge for any man. "If," he pondered seriously before asking in return, "if I really made a mistake, could you forgive me?" Elizabeth was taken aback and thought carefully. Then she said to him, "Yes, but only once." What was once an unintentional hypothetical unexpectedly became a reality one day. This was also Dylan's last hope. Clutching Elizabeth's skirt, he pleaded tearfully, "Give me one more chance, please." Elizabeth looked down at him and suddenly smiled. Perhaps this was fate. It wasn't that she didn't want to give him this chance, it was that she had already given it, and it was given in the previous life, in her past life. She didn't choose divorce but instead sent Georgia away because she remembered this promise and believed Dylan was just momentarily confused. Little did she know, he had truly changed his heart. And the chance she had promised ultimately became the spark that led to her family's ruin. Now, what face does he have left to bring it up again? None. Elizabeth took 2 steps back and sneered, "You've already wasted your chance. There's no possibility for us anymore." Those words were like the final straw. It seemed light, yet it landed heavily on Dylan's chest, pressing down so hard he could barely breathe. "Impossible," he whispered in agony. Suddenly, a metallic taste of blood rose in his throat, and he vomited a mouthful of blood before collapsing unconscious. The doctor stationed at the villa rushed over. They quickly lifted him onto a stretcher and took him to the temporary emergency room, where he was successfully revived. Elizabeth wanted to seize the opportunity to leave, but as soon as she stepped out the door, she was escorted back to her room by the bodyguards stationed in the courtyard. Forced to wait obediently for him to wake up, she was like a caged bird, watching the days and nights alternate outside the window, yet unable to fly out even a little. It wasn't until the night of the 3rd day, someone burst into her dreams shouting, "Elizabeth, wake up, I'll take you out." The voice sounded like Julian. Elizabeth thought she was dreaming, but when she groggily opened her eyes, she realized, this is not a dream. The person standing by the bed is Julian. she rubbed her eyes and asked excitedly, "Mr. Julian, how is it you? What brings you here?" "Of course, I'm here to take you away," seeing her dazed expression. Julian felt most of his worries melt away and couldn't resist teasing her. "What, don't want me here? I'll leave right now then." With that, he actually turned to leave. Panicking, Elizabeth stood up to grab his arm, explaining, "No, don't leave me behind. I do want you here. I was just still half asleep earlier." Julian burst out laughing, then he took her hand and said dotingly, "All right, I won't leave you behind. I promised your parents I'd bring you back safely. The guards in the yard will be changing shifts soon, and will take that opportunity to go down from the balcony." He had originally planned to storm in with his men, but unsure of Elizabeth's condition and afraid that a conflict might harm her, he resorted to sneaking in alone. Once she was safe, he would settle the score with Dylan. Elizabeth nodded. For some reason, though they had just met, Julian gave her a strong sense of security. Sure enough, 5 minutes later, the guards changed shifts. The two arrived at the balcony. Julian had just fastened the rope around Elizabeth when a voice sounded from behind. "Mr. Julian, why not say hello since you're already here?" Elizabeth stiffened and let out a sigh. Turning around, she saw Dylan standing behind her, his eyes filled with sorrow as he gazed at her. "Elizabeth, does staying by my side cause you so much pain?" He had originally planned to let her go tomorrow, but just now, a bodyguard came to ask for instructions, saying they had seen someone sneak into Elizabeth's room and whether they could enter to investigate. Hearing this, he immediately panicked. Enduring the pain, he rushed over, fearing that a thief had broken in, putting Elizabeth in danger. But who would have thought it was Julian? "Why is it him again?" Dylan was provoked by him into a competitive spirit, wanting to make one final bet. "Yes, it's agonizing." Elizabeth showed no mercy whatsoever. This relationship had long been ruined, and she no longer wanted to drag it out, continuing to be entangled like this. But these words were like a sharp blade, deeply piercing Dylan's heart, the pain so intense it was suffocating. "What about him?" He forced a bitter smile, pointing at Elizabeth's side where Julian stood, and asked, "Have you fallen for him?" As soon as the words were spoken, both of them froze. Julian looked down at Elizabeth, secretly awaiting her answer in his heart. But Elizabeth fell silent. Did she like him? At most, it was just a slight fondness. After all, he's not only handsome but also possesses abilities and refinement superior to other men, so it's normal to have a favorable impression. But she couldn't answer truthfully. Since Dylan cares so much, she might as well take this opportunity to make him give up. But she couldn't outright use Julian. "Who I like is none of your business." Elizabeth looked at him coldly and said, "I have nothing to do with you anymore. You have no right to interfere with whom I like or whom I marry in the future." The answer was ambiguous, neither confirming nor denying any feelings, but in Dylan's eyes, he was convinced she was defending Julian. "I insist on interfering." He angrily smashed the vase beside him. The bodyguards outside rushed in, and several of them knocked Julian to the ground. Elizabeth tried to stop them but was held back by him. "Do you really like him that much?" Dylan's eyes were filled with intense pain, yet within that pain lingered a trace of unwillingness. "If one of us must die, who would you choose?" "What do you mean?" Elizabeth had barely finished asking when he walked over and grabbed Julian, and the two of them stepped onto the stone railing. "This means," she understood instantly. Elizabeth's pupils constricted sharply. "Are you insane? Are you trying to threaten me with Julian's life?" "No," he chuckled lightly, "it's both our lives. I just want to gamble, to bet, whether there's even a tiny place for me in your heart." She stared at him intently, her chest heaving violently. She was so angry she almost laughed. "Dylan, I don't want to play this game with you. If Julian gets so much as a scratch, do you really think you can walk out of South City alive? It doesn't matter anymore." Dylan laughed in the wind, murmuring, "If you weren't here, I wouldn't want to live either." As he finished speaking, he pulled Julian and fell backward. "No." Elizabeth's heart leaped into her throat. She rushed forward and grabbed Julian's hand just in time, pulling herself up with his strength. But Dylan fell onto the first floor. Elizabeth looked down, her nails digging deep into her palms. She watched as he lay in a pool of blood, watched his pupils gradually dilate, watched him being carried away, yet her heart remained utterly unmoved. 3 months later, at the celebration banquet, Elizabeth's company successfully developed a new product, which topped the sales charts within a month. "Everyone in the circle is saying Elizabeth is a dark horse, and she was handpicked by Julian. Congratulations. Julian walked over to Elizabeth, clinked his glass against hers, took a sip, and then added, his condition isn't good. Elizabeth's hand holding the glass trembled. Last time he broke his leg, the doctor said if he cooperated with the treatment and did more rehabilitation exercises, the chances of a full recovery were quite high. But, Julian gazed at her, not only did he refuse to cooperate, but he also drank heavily every day. There were a few times when he nearly didn't wake up from alcohol poisoning. Recently, he was diagnosed with mental issues and might have to be sent to a psychiatric hospital. Do you want to go see him? Upon hearing this, Elizabeth remained silent for a long time. Finally, she smiled and said, no, this is his life lesson, and he should face it himself. As for hers, she had already turned in the paper long ago, and it's a perfect score paper.